The radio crackled with static, then silence. Staff Sergeant Marcus Torch Rodriguez pressed his back against the crumbling concrete wall, sweat mixing with dust on his weathered face. His team of Navy SEALs had been pinned down for 47 minutes in what should have been a routine extraction mission in the mountains of eastern Afghanistan. The intel was wrong. Dead wrong. "Control, this is Bravo 6, Rodriguez whispered into his headset, watching enemy muzzle flashes light up the ridgeline like deadly fireflies. "We've got approximately 30 hostiles in elevated positions. Request immediate air support over." The response came through broken and garbled. "Bravo 6, negative on fixed wing. Weather, visibility compromised." Rodriguez cursed under his breath. Above them, the sky had transformed from clear blue to an ominous wall of storm clouds that seemed to materialize from nowhere. Sand and debris whipped through the air as the wind howled between the rocky outcroppings. This wasn't just bad weather. This was a meteorological nightmare that would ground any sane pilot. Petty Officer Jackson Jazz Williams crawled over, his rifle clutched tight against his chest. "Torch, we're down to our last 30 rounds each. Whatever we're gonna do, we better do it fast." The enemy fire intensified. AK-47 rounds sparked off the rocks inches from their heads, and Rodriguez could hear the distinctive whistle of incoming RPGs. His team was trapped in a kill box with nowhere to run. The extraction point lay 800 meters across open ground, a death sentence under these conditions. That's when they heard it. At first, it was just a low rumble, almost indistinguishable from the thunder rolling across the mountains. But Rodriguez had spent enough time in combat zones to recognize that particular sound, the deep, throaty growl of turbofan engines cutting through the storm. "You hear that?" Williams asked, his eyes scanning the darkened sky. Rodriguez nodded, a flicker of hope crossing his face. But as the sound grew louder, doubt crept in. No pilot would be crazy enough to fly in this weather. The visibility was near zero, with crosswinds that could tear apart an aircraft. It had to be his imagination, or maybe enemy reinforcements arriving by helicopter. The enemy fighters seemed to hear it too. Their fire slackened as they peered upward, trying to identify the source of the approaching roar. The sound was getting closer, more distinct, definitely fixed-wing aircraft, but unlike anything Rodriguez had heard before. It wasn't the high-pitched scream of an F-16 or the steady drone of a C-130. This was something else entirely. Then, through the swirling chaos of sand and smoke, a shadow passed overhead. The radio suddenly burst to life with a voice Rodriguez would never forget, calm, professional, and unmistakably female. "Bravo 6, this is Hog 1. I've got eyes on your position. Danger close air support inbound. Mark your targets and keep your heads down." Rodriguez stared at the sky in disbelief. Someone was actually flying in this hellish weather, and they were here to save his team. The shadow passed again, lower this time, and Rodriguez caught a glimpse of distinctive twin engines and straight wings cutting through the storm. An A-10 Thunderbolt II, the legendary Warthog, piloted by someone with either nerves of steel or a complete death wish. "Hog 1, this is Bravo 6, Rodriguez responded, his voice tight with urgency. "Hostiles are positioned along the eastern ridgeline, approximately 400 meters from our position. We're marked with IR strobes." "Copy that, Bravo 6, I see your strobes. 30 Mike inbound in 15 seconds. Stay down." Rodriguez had called in close air support dozens of times, but he'd never heard a pilot sound so composed while flying through what looked like the end of the world. The wind was howling at 40 knots, visibility was less than a quarter mile, and lightning was dancing across the peaks like angry spirits. "Who is this pilot?" Williams asked, pressing himself deeper into cover. Before Rodriguez could answer, the sky erupted. The distinctive BRRRRRRT of the GAU-8 Avenger cannon tore through the air like thunder made of metal and death. Seven-barrel rotary cannon fire rained down on the ridgeline at 3,900 rounds per minute, each 30 depleted uranium round capable of punching through tank armor. The effect was devastating and immediate. Enemy fire ceased instantly. Through his binoculars, Rodriguez watched as entire sections of the ridgeline seemed to disintegrate under the withering barrage. Rocks and debris flew in all directions as the cannon rounds found their targets with surgical precision. But what impressed him most wasn't the firepower, it was the accuracy. Despite the horrific weather conditions, every round landed exactly where it needed to be. "Good hits, Hog One," Rodriguez called out. "You've neutralized the primary threat. We've got secondary hostiles moving in from the north." "I see them," came the reply. The pilot's voice remained steady, almost conversational. "Rolling in for a second pass. This might get a little loud." Rodriguez couldn't help but smile despite their dire situation. A little loud was military understatement at its finest. The A-10's cannon was one of the loudest weapons ever mounted on an aircraft, designed to strike fear into enemy hearts while music to friendly forces pinned down and desperate for help. The Warthog banked sharply to the left, its pilot demonstrating a level of precision flying that seemed impossible under these conditions. Rodriguez watched in awe as the aircraft carved through the turbulent air like it was on rails. The second gun run was even more devastating than the first. By the time the cannon fell silent, the mountainside looked like it had been hit by an earthquake. The enemy positions were obliterated, reduced to smoking craters and scattered debris. But more importantly, the path to the extraction point was now clear. "Bravo 6, this is Hog One," the pilot's voice crackled through the radio. "Your ride to the dance is clear. I'll provide overwatch until your extraction is complete." Rodriguez felt a surge of gratitude that went beyond words. This unknown pilot had just saved 6 American lives, flying through conditions that should have been impossible. "Hog One, we owe you one. What's your name?" There was a pause before the response came. "Call signs Phoenix Bravo 6, just doing my job." As Rodriguez led his team toward the extraction point, he couldn't shake the feeling that he'd just witnessed something extraordinary. The A-10 continued its lazy circles overhead, a guardian angel with twin engines and enough firepower to level a city block. But it wasn't the aircraft that impressed him. It was the pilot, someone who had the skill and courage to fly through hell itself to save his team. He made a mental note to find out more about this Phoenix when they got back to base. Heroes like that deserved recognition, even if they claimed to be just doing their job. Rodriguez and his team reached the extraction point without further incident, the Warthog maintaining its protective vigil until the rescue helicopter arrived. As they lifted off, Rodriguez caught one last glimpse of the A-10 through the helicopter's window, still circling like a metallic bird of prey against the storm-darkened sky. Phoenix had disappeared into the clouds as suddenly as she'd appeared, leaving behind only smoking enemy positions and 6 very grateful SEALs. But Rodriguez knew their paths would cross again. In his experience, pilots like that were rare, and legends had a way of finding each other in the chaos of war. The helicopter banked toward base, carrying them away from the mountains and toward safety. But Rodriguez's mind remained fixed on that mysterious voice, and the pilot who turned certain death into miraculous salvation. Back at Forward Operating Base Chapman, Rodriguez filed his after-action report with unusual attention to detail. He wanted to make sure Phoenix got proper recognition for what she'd accomplished. Flying close air support missions was dangerous enough under ideal conditions. Doing it in the middle of a massive storm was either insanity or the highest form of professional skill. He submitted a recommendation for a Distinguished Flying Cross, knowing it was the least he could do for someone who'd risked everything to save his team. But when he tried to follow up on the paperwork a few days later, he hit a bureaucratic wall that puzzled him. "Sorry, Sergeant Rodriguez," the admin clerk said, not looking up from his computer. That pilot's file is classified above your clearance level. Can't tell you anything more than her call sign and aircraft type. Rodriguez frowned. Classified. That was unusual for a routine close air support mission. What about my recommendation for the DFC? Already been processed and approved at levels way above us, the clerk replied. Whatever she did out there, somebody upstairs took notice. As Rodriguez walked away from the admin building, he couldn't shake his curiosity about Phoenix. Who was she? Why was her file classified? And more importantly, what was her story? He decided to ask around quietly among the other aircrews stationed at Chapman. Someone had to know something about the mysterious pilot who'd saved his team. But what he discovered over the next few days would surprise him more than he'd ever imagined. The first clue came from Master Sergeant Pete "Bulldog" Harrison, a veteran crew chief who'd been maintaining A-10s for over 20 years. They were sharing coffee in the maintenance hangar when Rodriguez brought up the subject. Phoenix, Harrison's weathered face creased into a knowing smile. Oh, you met her, did you? That's Lieutenant Colonel Nix Calderon, one of the most decorated A-10 pilots in the Air Force. She's got a reputation that precedes her by about 1,000 miles. Rodriguez nearly choked on his coffee. Lieutenant Colonel, I thought she sounded young on the radio. She is young, only 34, but she's been flying the hog for 12 years. Started as a second lieutenant fresh out of flight school and worked her way up the hard way. Harrison leaned back in his chair, his expression growing serious. Thing is, she's got a bit of a complicated history with command. What do you mean? Harrison glanced around to make sure they weren't being overheard. About 3 years ago, she was up for promotion to full colonel. Had all the qualifications, all the endorsements, the whole 9 yards. Then she got into it with a general over some questionable tactics he wanted her to use in a mission over Syria. Let's just say she didn't back down, and neither did he. Rodriguez was intrigued. So what happened? She got transferred to what amounts to exile, flying solo missions out of remote forward bases, usually the jobs nobody else wants or can handle. Officially, she's still on the promotion track, but everybody knows she's been blacklisted by certain elements in the chain of command. That explains the classified file, Rodriguez mused. Maybe, Harrison said, but there's more to it than that. Word is she's been conducting some kind of specialized operations that even the Pentagon doesn't talk about. Missions so sensitive that even discussing them could end your career. Rodriguez felt a chill run down his spine. Phoenix wasn't just a skilled pilot, she was operating at levels he couldn't even comprehend. What kind of missions? Harrison shook his head. That's above my pay grade, Sergeant. All I know is that when Phoenix shows up, it usually means something big is about to go down. And from what I hear, she's never failed to complete a mission, no matter how impossible it seemed. That evening, Rodriguez found himself standing on the flight line, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of orange and purple. He was thinking about Phoenix, wondering what drove someone to take on missions that were apparently too dangerous or controversial for other pilots. His contemplation was interrupted by the distinctive sound of turbofan engines approaching from the south. He turned to see an A-10 Warthog coming in for landing, its landing lights cutting through the growing darkness. Something about the aircraft's approach seemed familiar, and Rodriguez realized he was watching Phoenix return from another mission. The A-10 touched down smoothly despite the crosswinds that were still gusting across the airfield. Rodriguez watched as it taxied toward the maintenance area, noting the precision with which the pilot maneuvered the aircraft. Even on the ground, there was something graceful about the way Phoenix handled the massive machine. As the engine spooled down and the canopy opened, Rodriguez got his first look at the pilot who'd saved his life. She was smaller than he'd expected, but there was an unmistakable aura of confidence and competence about her movements as she ran through her post-flight checklist. Rodriguez found himself walking toward the aircraft, drawn by curiosity and a desire to thank her properly for what she'd done. But as he approached, he noticed something that made him stop in his tracks. Phoenix was sitting in the cockpit with her helmet off, her dark hair plastered to her head with sweat, staring at something in her hands. Even from a distance, Rodriguez could see that her hands were shaking slightly, and her expression was one of profound exhaustion, not physical, but emotional. For a moment, the mask of professional competence slipped, and Rodriguez glimpsed the human being beneath the legend. Someone who carried a burden he couldn't fully understand, who flew missions that extracted a price beyond mere physical danger. He decided not to approach. Phoenix deserved her privacy in that moment, and he sensed that whatever she was dealing with was far beyond his ability to help. Instead, he quietly turned and walked away, his respect for her deepening even further. As he headed back to his quarters, Rodriguez reflected on what he'd learned about Phoenix. She wasn't just a pilot. She was a warrior carrying out a mission that apparently came with costs he couldn't imagine. But despite whatever personal price she was paying, she continued to show up when others needed her most. Over the next several weeks, Rodriguez began to piece together more of Phoenix's story from various sources around the base. What emerged was a picture of a pilot who'd started her career as an idealistic young officer and had been gradually shaped by experiences that would have broken lesser people. Captain Maria Santos, an intelligence officer who'd worked with Phoenix on several occasions, provided some crucial insights during a chance encounter in the base cafeteria. Nix Calderon is the kind of pilot who sees things in black and white, Santos explained over coffee. Right and wrong, mission success or failure, protecting the innocent or letting them die. There's no middle ground with her, which makes her incredibly effective but also puts her at odds with people who prefer more flexible interpretations of orders. Is that what got her in trouble with command? Rodriguez asked. Santos nodded. 3 years ago, she was ordered to provide close air support for what turned out to be a questionable operation in Syria. Intelligence later revealed that civilian casualties were not just likely but expected. Phoenix refused to participate and went directly to the Inspector General with her concerns. That took guts. It also ended her fast-track career progression, Santos said grimly. The operation was eventually canceled, and an investigation proved her concerns were valid. But by then, she'd made powerful enemies who weren't about to forget her insubordination. Rodriguez was beginning to understand the weight Phoenix carried. She'd chosen principle over career advancement, saving lives at the cost of her own professional future. So now she's stuck flying solo missions nobody else wants. That's one way to look at it, Santos replied. Another way is that she's been given missions that require someone with her particular combination of skills and moral clarity. The kind of operations where failure isn't an option and collateral damage isn't acceptable. What kind of operations are those? Santos glanced around nervously. The kind we don't discuss, even among ourselves. But I'll tell you this, Phoenix has been involved in some of the most successful counterterrorism operations of the past 3 years. Missions that officially never happened but saved countless lives. That revelation put everything in perspective for Rodriguez. Phoenix wasn't being punished. She was being utilized in ways that conventional military structure couldn't officially acknowledge. She'd become a ghost in the machine, operating outside normal channels to accomplish objectives that required both exceptional skill and uncompromising ethics. As the weeks passed, Rodriguez found himself paying closer attention to the rhythms of the base, trying to spot patterns in Phoenix's comings and goings. What he noticed was that she always flew alone, always at odd hours, and always returned looking like she'd been through hell. But he also noticed something else. The respect she commanded from the maintenance crews, the intelligence personnel, and even some of the higher-ranking officers. Despite her supposedly controversial status, Phoenix had supporters throughout the command structure, people who recognized her value even if they couldn't openly acknowledge it. Master Sergeant Harrison confirmed this observation during one of their regular coffee meetings. "You want to know the truth about Phoenix," he said, lowering his voice. "She's probably the most requested close air support pilot in the entire theater. Special operations units specifically ask for her by name, even though it means going through extra bureaucratic channels. Because of her flying skills." "That's part of it," Harrison admitted. "But it's more than that. Phoenix has never left anyone behind, never failed to complete a mission, and never compromised operational security. In a world where trust is the most valuable currency, she's got more in the bank than most generals." Rodriguez was starting to realize that Phoenix represented something rare in the military. A person who'd found a way to serve with absolute integrity, despite the political complexities of modern warfare. She'd paid a price for her principles, but she'd also carved out a unique role that allowed her to make a difference in ways that conventional command structures couldn't. The full scope of that difference became clear to Rodriguez about a month later, when he overheard a conversation between two special operations officers in the base gym. They were discussing a recent mission that had gone sideways, and Phoenix's name came up in the context of an impossible rescue operation. 12 hostages, including 2 American journalists, held in a compound surrounded by over 100 militants, one officer was saying. Intel said it was a suicide mission, but Phoenix volunteered anyway. Flew a solo mission deep into enemy territory, eliminated the threat, and extracted all 12 hostages without a single casualty. "How the hell did she manage that?" the other officer asked. "Nobody knows the details. It's all classified above our level. But word is she spent 3 days planning the operation, studying satellite imagery and intercepted communications until she knew every guard rotation and every possible escape route. When she finally made her move, it was like watching a master craftsman at work." Rodriguez felt a surge of pride hearing this, even though he'd played no part in the operation. Phoenix represented the best of what the military could be: skilled, dedicated, and willing to risk everything for the mission and the people depending on her. But as he walked back to his quarters that night, Rodriguez also felt a deep sadness for what Phoenix had sacrificed. She'd given up conventional success, normal relationships, and probably any chance of a peaceful retirement in order to serve at the highest level. The weight of that sacrifice was visible in those moments when she thought nobody was watching. Rodriguez decided that, when his deployment ended, he would find a way to publicly recognize Phoenix's contributions, even if it meant going through unofficial channels. Heroes like her deserve to be remembered, regardless of the political complications surrounding their service. The opportunity came sooner than he expected, when Rodriguez was selected to participate in a documentary about close air support operations in Afghanistan. The filmmakers were looking for personal stories that illustrated the bond between ground forces and air crews, and Rodriguez immediately thought of his encounter with Phoenix. But when he approached the production team with the story, he encountered the same bureaucratic obstacles that had prevented him from learning more about Phoenix's background. Her missions were too classified, her identity too sensitive, her operations too compartmentalized for public discussion. Frustrated but not defeated, Rodriguez decided on a different approach. He would tell the story without using names or specific details, focusing instead on the broader themes of courage, sacrifice, and the bonds forged in combat. The story of Phoenix would be told, even if her identity remained protected. The documentary segment turned out better than Rodriguez had hoped. Without mentioning Phoenix by name or call sign, he described the experience of being rescued by a pilot who'd risked everything to save his team. He spoke about the professionalism, skill, and courage required to fly close air support missions under impossible conditions. But more importantly, he talked about the human cost of such service. The toll taken on the men and women who volunteered for the most dangerous missions, who sacrificed personal advancement for operational success, who carried the weight of life-and-death decisions in hostile skies. The segment resonated with audiences in ways Rodriguez hadn't expected. Viewers responded not just to the dramatic rescue story, but to the deeper themes about military service and the price paid by those who choose duty over personal gain. Letters poured in from veterans who recognized similar stories from their own experiences. One letter, however, stood out from the rest. It was written on official Air Force letterhead and signed by a colonel Rodriguez didn't recognize. The message was brief but profound. Your story about the anonymous pilot captured something important about military service that often goes unrecognized. That pilot, whoever they are, represents the best of our profession. Thank you for telling their story with the respect and dignity it deserved. Rodriguez kept that letter, sensing that it represented more than just appreciation from a random officer. Someone in the chain of command was paying attention to Phoenix's story, even if they couldn't acknowledge it publicly. Months later, after Rodriguez had rotated back to the United States, he received another piece of correspondence that surprised him. It was a handwritten note on plain paper, with no return address or identifying marks. The message was simple: "Thank you for understanding what we do and why we do it. The sky is never empty when good people stand watch. A friend you'll probably never meet again." Rodriguez knew immediately who had sent the note. Phoenix had somehow learned about the documentary segment and had taken the time to reach out, despite the risks involved in making contact. The gesture moved him more than any official recognition ever could have. He framed the note and hung it in his office, a reminder of an encounter that had changed his understanding of military service and sacrifice. Phoenix had saved his life that day in Afghanistan, but she'd also taught him something important about courage and principle that would influence the rest of his career. Years passed, and Rodriguez eventually rose to the rank of Master Sergeant, using the leadership lessons he'd learned from watching Phoenix operate under impossible circumstances. He never forgot the pilot who'd appeared out of a storm to save his team, and he made sure that story was passed down to the younger soldiers under his command. The legend of Phoenix continued to grow within certain circles of the special operations community, though she remained officially invisible to the wider military and the public. Rodriguez heard occasional updates through informal networks: another impossible rescue, another classified mission accomplished against all odds, another example of what one person could achieve when they refused to compromise their principles. But perhaps the most important lesson Rodriguez learned from his encounter with Phoenix wasn't about flying or fighting or even courage. It was about the power of doing the right thing regardless of the personal cost, about serving something larger than yourself, even when that service goes unrecognized. In a world that often seemed to reward political maneuvering over professional competence, Phoenix represented a different path, one that prioritized mission success and the welfare of others above personal advancement. She'd paid a price for that choice, but she'd also achieved something that no amount of conventional success could match: the knowledge that she'd made a real difference in the lives of people who desperately needed help. Rodriguez never saw Phoenix again, but he carried her example with him for the rest of his military career. When faced with difficult decisions, he often asked himself what she would do, what choice would best serve the mission and the people depending on him, regardless of the political or personal implications. That question guided him through 2 more deployments, a promotion to sergeant major, and eventually a transition to civilian life, where he worked with veteran organizations to help other soldiers adjust to post-military careers. Throughout it all, he remained convinced that his brief encounter with Phoenix had shaped him into a better soldier and a better person. The story might have ended there, with Rodriguez carrying Phoenix's memory as a private inspiration for the rest of his life. But 20 years after that fateful day in Afghanistan, he received a phone call that brought everything full circle in ways he never could have imagined. The caller identified himself as Colonel James Mitchell, commander of the Air Force Special Operations School at Hurlburt Field in Florida. "Sergeant Major Rodriguez," he said, "I understand you have some experience with close air support operations in Afghanistan. We're developing a new training program, and we could use someone with your background to help design realistic scenarios." Rodriguez was intrigued but puzzled. "I'm retired, Colonel. Why would you need a ground pounder like me for an Air Force training program?" "Because," Mitchell replied, "we're trying to capture the lessons learned from some of our most successful close air support operations. Operations that required unprecedented coordination between ground forces and aircrews operating under extreme conditions." Something in the colonel's tone suggested there was more to the story. "What kind of operations are we talking about?" "The kind that officially never happened but saved hundreds of lives over the past 2 decades," Mitchell said carefully. "Operations conducted by pilots who operated outside normal command structures, but achieved results that redefined what we thought was possible in close air support." Rodriguez felt a familiar chill run down his spine. "Are we talking about Phoenix?" There was a long pause before Mitchell responded. "I can't discuss specific individuals over an unsecured line, but I can tell you that the pilot you're thinking of has agreed to participate in this program. In fact, she specifically requested that you be brought in as a consultant." Rodriguez's heart raced. After 20 years, Phoenix wanted to work with him again. But why? And what had changed that allowed her story to be told in an official capacity? "Colonel, I have to ask, what's Phoenix's status these days? Last I heard, she was persona non grata with certain elements of command." Mitchell chuckled. "Let's just say that time has a way of validating people who were ahead of their time. The tactics and principles she pioneered are now considered standard doctrine for special operations air support. She's gone from pariah to prophet, you might say." "And she's still flying?" "Oh yes," Mitchell said. "At 44, she's still one of the most requested pilots in the special operations community. But now she's also training the next generation of close air support pilots, teaching them not just how to fly, but how to think about their missions in terms of lives saved rather than targets destroyed." Rodriguez felt a surge of satisfaction hearing this. Phoenix had finally received the recognition she deserved, even if it had taken 2 decades. "When do you need me at Hurlburt?" "Next month, if you're available. Fair warning, though, this isn't going to be a typical consulting gig. Phoenix has some unconventional ideas about how close air support should be taught, and she's not interested in perpetuating the old boy network that held her back for so many years." "Meaning?" "Meaning she's more interested in finding people who can think outside the box than people who can navigate the bureaucracy," Mitchell explained. "She wants to train pilots who will put mission success and civilian protection above career advancement, even if it means ruffling some feathers along the way." Rodriguez smiled. That sounded exactly like the Phoenix he remembered. "Colonel, you can count me in. It'll be an honor to work with her again." As he hung up the phone, Rodriguez reflected on the strange turns his life had taken. The pilot who'd saved his life in a storm over Afghanistan was now in a position to shape the future of close air support operations. The principles she'd fought for, putting lives before politics, mission success before personal advancement, were finally being recognized as the foundation of effective military aviation. But more than that, Rodriguez realized that his own journey had been influenced by Phoenix's example in ways he was only now beginning to understand. The leadership lessons he'd learned, the decisions he'd made, the young soldiers he'd mentored, all of it could be traced back to that day when he'd witnessed true professionalism under impossible circumstances. A month later, Rodriguez found himself standing on the flight line at Hurlburt Field, watching A-10 Warthogs conduct training exercises in the Florida sun. The aircraft looked exactly the same as they had 20 years ago in Afghanistan, but the context was entirely different. These were pilots being trained in tactics that Phoenix had developed through decades of real-world experience. "She's in the third aircraft from the left," a voice said behind him. Rodriguez turned to see Colonel Mitchell approaching, wearing a knowing smile. "After 20 years, I figured you might want to see her in action again." Rodriguez focused on the designated aircraft, watching as it executed a perfect gun run on a practice target. Even from a distance, there was something unmistakably familiar about the pilot's technique: the precise timing, the economy of movement, the total integration of pilot and machine. "She's training them well," Rodriguez observed. "She's training them to be better than she was at their age," Mitchell corrected. "Phoenix believes that each generation of pilots should surpass the previous one, that the lessons she learned through trial and error should be passed down so others don't have to repeat her mistakes." As they watched, the training exercise concluded and the A-10s began returning to the field. Rodriguez felt his pulse quicken as Phoenix's aircraft approached the runway. After 2 decades, he was finally going to meet the pilot who'd saved his life and inspired his career. The aircraft touched down smoothly and taxied to the designated parking area. Rodriguez watched as the canopy opened, and Phoenix began her post-flight routine, her movements as precise and professional as they'd been 20 years ago. But when she finally climbed down from the cockpit and removed her helmet, Rodriguez was surprised by what he saw. Phoenix had aged, of course, but there was something different about her bearing, a sense of peace and satisfaction that hadn't been there during their first encounter. The weight she'd carried as a young lieutenant colonel seemed to have been replaced by the confidence of someone who'd finally found their true calling. "Master Sergeant Rodriguez," she said, approaching with an extended hand and a smile that transformed her entire face. "After 20 years, we finally get to meet properly." Rodriguez shook her hand, struck by the warmth and strength of her grip. "Colonel Calderon, it's an honor to finally thank you in person for what you did that day." "You already thanked me," Phoenix replied, her expression growing serious. "That documentary segment you did meant more to me than any official recognition ever could. You understood what we were trying to accomplish out there, and you told the story with the respect it deserved." "I just told the truth about what I witnessed." "That's rarer than you might think," Phoenix said. "Most people prefer comfortable myths to difficult truths, but you chose to highlight the cost of service rather than just the glory, and that made all the difference." As they walked toward the training facility, Rodriguez found himself studying Phoenix more carefully. The legendary pilot who'd haunted his imagination for 2 decades turned out to be a thoughtful, articulate woman who spoke about military service with the wisdom that comes from having paid the full price for her convictions. "Colonel Mitchell tells me you're revolutionizing how close air support is taught," Rodriguez said. Phoenix nodded. "We're trying to move beyond the old model of pilots as flying gun platforms and toward a more holistic approach that emphasizes the human dimension of air support operations. It's not enough to hit targets accurately. Our pilots need to understand the broader context of their missions and the long-term consequences of their actions." "That sounds like it might ruffle some feathers in the establishment." "Good," Phoenix replied with a slight smile. "The establishment needs ruffling from time to time. Complacency is the enemy of excellence, and excellence is what the people on the ground deserve from us." Rodriguez could hear echoes of the pilot who'd refused to participate in questionable operations 20 years ago. But there was also something new, a sense of institutional authority that allowed her to implement changes rather than just resist them. "How did you finally manage to turn your reputation around?" Rodriguez asked. Phoenix was quiet for a moment, then replied thoughtfully, "I didn't change. The world changed around me. The tactics I was using, the principles I was fighting for, the approach to air support that got me in trouble with command, All of that gradually became recognized as best practice. It took time, but eventually results speak louder than politics. And now you get to train the next generation using those same principles. That's the most rewarding part, Phoenix said, her voice warming with genuine enthusiasm. Every pilot who graduates from this program goes out knowing that their primary mission is to protect people, not destroy things. They understand that precision and restraint are more important than raw firepower, that saving lives is more important than advancing careers. As they entered the training facility, Rodriguez was impressed by the sophistication of the programs Phoenix had developed. Flight simulators were integrated with ground-based tactical scenarios, allowing pilots to experience the full complexity of close air support operations. But what struck him most was the emphasis on ethical decision-making and the human consequences of aerial warfare. We put our students through scenarios where they have to choose between mission parameters and civilian protection, Phoenix explained, leading Rodriguez through the facility. We want them to understand that sometimes the right choice is the difficult choice, and that they'll be judged not just on their technical skills, but on their moral courage. Rodriguez recognized the philosophy that had guided Phoenix throughout her career, now being institutionalized in a way that would influence generations of military aviators. This is your legacy, he realized. Phoenix paused, considering his words carefully. I hope so. But it's also the legacy of everyone who supported these principles when they weren't popular, everyone who chose mission success over personal advancement, everyone who understood that military service is about more than following orders. People like you, she continued, turning to face Rodriguez directly, who recognized what we were trying to accomplish and helped tell that story when it needed to be told. Rodriguez felt a profound sense of completion in that moment. The chance encounter that had shaped his military career had led to this, a partnership with the pilot who'd inspired him to pursue excellence regardless of the personal cost. Together, they would help shape the future of military aviation in ways that honored the principles they'd both tried to live by. Over the following months, Rodriguez and Phoenix worked together to develop training scenarios based on real-world experiences from Afghanistan, Iraq, and other theaters of operation. The programs they created emphasized not just the technical aspects of close air support, but the broader context of military service in an era when the consequences of individual actions could have global implications. But perhaps more importantly, they worked to instill in their students the kind of moral courage that Phoenix had demonstrated throughout her career, the willingness to do what was right even when it came at personal cost, the understanding that true military leadership meant serving something larger than oneself. The story of Phoenix, once a controversial figure who'd sacrificed her career for her principles, had become the foundation for a new approach to military aviation that prioritized ethical behavior and mission success over political considerations. Her transformation from pariah to prophet was,